Hey everybody, welcome to another show. And I'm glad we put the episode number because once you get to 24, you're like, what show number is this? So we're doing a great job of doing that. So episode 24, prioritizing tasks as a CSM. Happy to be here. Happy to have these lovely ladies with me on the panel. We'll do intros here in a second. The only Success Panda housekeeping we'll tackle today is we have our Panda Pals group that's been growing. We had our third call this past Wednesday. It's every Wednesday at 1. It's growing 40% every week. So let's keep that trend up. And what the group is just a group of great people helping each other in their job search and then learning my framework along the way. So feel free to head over to my featured section on my LinkedIn page to learn more and sign up for an account at successpanda.io. Ladies, how are we doing?
Marvelous. Great. Hello, everyone. So excited.
Awesome. Yes. So let's do intros. We'll start with Felicia, then Melissa. So give us like a minute and a half intro of who you are, what you do, and then also something fun you like to do. And then Deidre will go at the very end.
Great. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Here, based in northern New Jersey, just north of New York City. I've been in customer success, B2B SaaS startup for over 10 years as a leader of customer success and support, primarily for financial process automation, supporting enterprise and mid-market clients. I started my career as an accountant, so I was general accounting manager at Avon Products before pivoting into tech, and it was pretty predictable as far as prioritizing. So you just don't die or get married during tax season or year-end close, and that's it. That's all you really have to know. And then I pivoted into startup, and it's completely different, and it's the best place to learn prioritizing quickly. And that's what I love about it. And what I love about the CS world is every day is different, and it's a puzzle to solve. And for fun, I like to play recreation softball. So I've been playing softball since I'm 5 years old. I'm on 2 leagues, and we're going into the spring season. So I'm pretty excited about that. From April through August, I'll be playing softball, and happy to be here today.
That is cool. I have a really embarrassing softball story, but I'll get that later.
No, I love that. I love that it's a sport because I think my topic is not as in the movement space. Anyway, I'm Melissa Garcia. I am the director of member success at Chief, but I've been in the CS world for the past 10 years or so, leading and building teams similar to Felicia in different startup in the tech space. I just love the world of CS, and I love how it continues to evolve in the space. I also lead the New York chapter head of events with my other New York chapter leads for Women of CS. And so that's kind of my passion project on the side of this, but all things CS, as you can tell, is something I love to do. On a personal note, I would say like going out to eat is one of my hobbies. It's not as perhaps as Felicia's topic, but based in New York, so really enjoy all the restaurants that we have there. And so that's one of my favorite things to do to kind of decompress when I'm not kind of immersed in all things customer success. But really happy to be here with this fantastic group and get to chat with you all today.
Nice. Thanks, Melissa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Deidre.
So excited. Oh, thank you, Brett. Deidre Williams. I'm actually based in freezing Dallas. So for those of you that have spent any time in Texas, this is the weather that we are not accustomed to and not prepared for, but we're getting through it. From a customer success standpoint, I love to call myself a customer success revenue-centric or revenue architect success leader that really focuses on driving value for my customers. Most recently, I was SVP of customer success for an ed tech. However, I can't announce it yet, but I will be going into a C-suite role a little bit in a couple of weeks with a new organization. I can't announce it yet, but looking forward to that. And I think this is such a wonderful topic because it's something that a lot of the people that I mentor as an advisor for women in customer success always ask me how they prioritize their time. As far as what I do for fun, I am actually a yogi. This will be my 26th year in yoga. I have done yoga all over the world, most recently in Chamonix, France, and I'm headed to Iceland later this year. So that's my fun fact, and I'm looking forward to this call.
Thank you. So cool.
Wow.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, what I do for fun is indoor soccer, and today's our last game of the season. And I am in a co-ed league, but I'm second in scoring so far. So if I get 2 goals, I could probably be top of the table, and then I'll just retire like Uncle Rico and talk about the glory days. Uh, and then I can move on to something else. Funny softball. So I didn't play baseball. I joined a softball league, an all guys softball league. Felicia, it was like 4 years ago. You're used to overhand pitch in baseball, so you can time it. And I struck out the first game all 4 times. Underhand softball because
Yeah.
it's like just the timing of it. It's just way different. And so I didn't quit. I stuck through it and I got a lot better. But when you brought up softball, it just brought back that memory of just being like, wow, I cannot hit this ball.
Yeah, it's tricky. I still strike out.
No,
I played in a league with I used to be a consultant, and I was the catcher. I was horrible. I kept praying that they would kick me off the team, and they just wouldn't.
It was
But
funny.
I had a good time.
It was funny because that was like the only softball game my wife went to, and she's like, well, this will keep you humble.
It is a humbling experience. I would say that it's a humbling.
I was like, all right, thanks for that. Well, Aisha, Brad. Okay, we don't talk about that, Aisha. You know I don't run. Running's against my unless I have like food dangling in front of me from like a fishing pole.
That's what I say. I only run around the bases. Other than that, I'm not
Yeah.
running.
That counts.
Shout out to Aisha. We're
Yeah.
in a CS leadership group together. So
Yeah, she's always watching the show, so it's cool. Alrighty, so let's jump in. Yeah, what we talked about a little bit in the pre-show and what's already kind of been mentioned in intros is this is a topic, especially in a question for a lot of, we'll just say, IC roles, particularly IC CSM roles. I think it's a general just interview question and topic in general, just in business, right? Because it's not just customer success managers that are busy and probably overscheduled. It's probably a universal challenge. But let's jump into a more meta question first, which is so when prioritizing tasks, how do we set that expectations kind of like with your manager? So let's just say you're in an IC role. Do you need to have a conversation to front run this with your manager on how you should prioritize? If you should have that meeting, what should it be? What's the strategy? Should we talk about this at the very outset? And then how should you approach it? So we'll just go in reverse order. We'll do Deidre and then Melissa and Felicia, and then we'll just open it up.
yeah, no, I think it's because as a CS leader, it's a conversation that I have with all of my direct reports. And so I do think that if my direct reports aren't having it with me, it's definitely a conversation that I'm going to have with them. And I like to give them 3 priorities, and they're bucketed into what I think they should focus on, particularly in a CS leadership role or CS direct report role. The first thing is what I consider customer value and retention. So I call that the C1. And it means that their tasks and activities really need to be focused on driving value for our customers. So customer retention and value realization. The second one is what I call C2, and it's the customer-led revenue growth, because as we've learned now, this role is really leading towards revenue, and that's the reality of where we are in this space. So I want them to know what revenue targets they have, whether they're indirect through CQuels or if they actually have a quota, which is part of their role. And then the third C is what I call customer advocacy or loyalty. And those 3 buckets, everything they should be doing should be prioritized in those buckets. And then I can get into detail below that. But that's the conversation I have with all of my direct reports. And I think it's something that they should have with me or their leaders whenever they start a new role.
Cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just +1 on all of that. I think if you're not having the conversation and you're going into a new role, it's a great way to show up, right? And say like, I want to have this conversation with my direct leader. It shows that you're thinking ahead, you're thinking about the business, you're thinking about the impact you can have. The only thing I would add to that, I think those three things are perfect, is thinking through like, how does this relate to the bigger picture across the business? How does this relate to what the strategy is at the company? And then like you can anchor yourself into that, right, in your work. And I think when you make that connection, you're able to kind of prioritize better because you can ask yourself the question, is this related to the company goal or my goal that fits within that, which are those oftentimes now revenue goals that you talked about. So that's the only thing I would add there. I think it's definitely important to have the conversation, whether you're starting a role, whether you've never had the conversation before and you've been in the role. Like, I think for, especially in IC, be proactive about it, right? Ask the question. And if your manager isn't coming to you with it, it's perfectly fine for you to go and have that conversation yourself.
Be proactive as a CSM. Shocking.
Be proactive in your own role, not just with your customers.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I agree with both. And here's my take. Priority number one is you. So first prioritize yourself and wrap around those goals. And don't go in blind. Definitely have that conversation, but go into it proactively and say, this is how I typically prioritize my day-to-day, my week, and I'd like to hear your thoughts so that they know that you have a perspective and a format that you have worked through that's been successful for you in the past. And then you can align further from there and iterate, because it's always an iteration.
Mm-hmm. I like that. 100%. Yep.
Yeah, if I had to throw my 2 cents in, like, I think what's worked for me is that, and what I tell people, you know, if you're in a CSM role, or if you're a job seeker, I think the KPI is kind of the same, because I'm a man of simplicity, you know, and I love simplicity. I love the power of simplicity. Allows people to execute, and there's complete clarity. And I tell people, you know, my last team that I manage, the KPI was, yes, we have our, we'll say, institutional KPIs, NRR, GRR, all the things that the CFO is going to ask about. But what I really want to know is, how many minutes did you spend in front of a customer? Or as a job seeker, how many minutes did you spend in front of a human being, right? Because spending FaceTime in front of people is kind of the blocking and tackling of being able to be a customer first, proactive, strategic CSM. And everything else besides that is just a supplement to that. So my bit of advice would just be, when you're in the interview process, or if you get hired, just before you get cooking, probably in the interview process, one of my favorite questions is like, what's the one KPI that if I hit, I would never get fired for, right? Or what's the most important KPI? But it can only be one, right?
Yep.
So you'll get very different responses depending on the leader and the organization of what they value. But for me, I always tell people, hey, however many minutes that you spend in front of customers are minutes well spent, right? So that's my 2 cents. But to transition, let's talk about we talk about startups. We've mentioned startups. There's a term, and I mean, this is my podcast. I might as well just take the credit for it, because I brought it up 4 years ago about having full stack CSM. I remember when I did that, I did a post a long time ago talking about full stack because I'd gone to a coding boot camp and I was using the term. So unless anybody's got a post otherwise, and I'm gonna take the W on that. But if you're looking at startups where they're doing what I call full stack CS work, meaning that they're doing the entire customer journey. They're doing pre-sales, onboarding, implementation, integration, expansion, renewal, advocacy. You can tell I've listed that off one time or two. So if you're doing all that, and say you're working in a startup, because a lot of people are. So a lot of people, even not a startup, you're working at a big company, but it's an immature CS program. The question is how do you as a full stack CSM, for those who are in that situation, how do you prioritize your time given your portfolio, and then where people are at within that? that customer journey. So that's kind of open-ended. You can take it whichever way you want. But let's go Melissa, Felicia, and then Deidre.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a constant topic I'm hearing not only from people on my team, but I think just across the CS space, because people are owning so much and organizations tend to be slimmer and there's just more to do. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, right? And so I think for me and what I advise like my team to do and others to do is like, it's a daily practice of like, what do I get done today? I think if you're thinking through, yes, you should think about the future, but when you're thinking about prioritizing your day and how you get things done, if you just think, oh, I have all these things to do, you're going to feel overwhelmed. And so I think there's a practice of like daily and weekly. I tend to start my week and tell others to start their week in IC roles of like, okay, what are the top 3 things I need to get done this week for it to be a good week? What are those things? And if I get those 3 things done, it's not to say that's all you're going to do, but if I get those 3 things done, then I had a good week. I think you can at least anchor yourself to feel motivated to keep going when there is so much going on. And I think the other challenge with the CSM role in particular is like, there's oftentimes everything feels like it's on fire. Everything's an emergency, right? Like there's always an escalation. There's always a loud customer. There's always something going on. And so I think sometimes it's really important to think through, even though someone's loud or something feels like an emergency, is it really? And like working through what that means and going back to the KPIs, is it impacting the KPI? Is this driving me forward? And so I think there's just that constant question of asking yourself that day to day and having it be a constant practice. Otherwise, you can just be kind of pulled in all these different directions because you can't onboard every single customer, help them engage, also renew them every single day with everyone in your book of business. Like it's just not going to work. So I think starting there is really helpful.
Cool.
Agreed. It's like you're pouring more and more out of the same pitcher into the small glass. Exactly. And so you either have to expand, they have to, grow the team, which is kind of not likely, of course, right? Or you have to, expand yourself. And, how do you do that? So, and going back to prioritize yourself, which means aligning to your own goals, because a lot of times you're going to be pulled by other people's priorities, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on meeting your goals, right? You always want to help your friend or your buddy asks you, hey, can you do this last minute? You want to make sure you have that RACI chart, right? And especially in a startup, they expect that collaboration. They expect everybody's going to do everything. Everybody's going to pitch in, which is great. But in the long run, those little things that you do are going to go unrecognized. And so you want to make sure you're really honing in really sharply on the goals that, again, align to the higher goals of the company and prioritize around that. And then within that, be very intentional. Is it, what is the scope? What is the urgency? What is the impact? And evaluate that each time. And if you can then maybe you can delegate it out to somebody else or collaborate with that person and say, hey, I really don't have the time to do this, but let's sit down together and collaborate on how we can get it done. And you really want to make sure you're scheduling just not your weekly, your monthly. I mean, you could really put your whole calendar down for a year and kind of have that mapped out and make sure you're looking at monitoring, the health weekly. Don't let those things slip. And the things that take the most time, that usually what ends up slipping. And then you're in a panic. So you'll have that feeling of burnout if you don't prioritize yourself. But as Melissa said, if you have those little 3 wins for yourself, you're going to minimize that feeling of burnout.
Cool.
Yeah, 100% on everything that's been said. One of the reasons why I developed my 3 C's was because I was in a startup and I was having to work with a set of full stack CSM. So I did know the term back then, Brad, but I love that term. I'm going to use it going forward. I will totally give you credit. But I want to add, the only piece I would add is love the KPIs. My team used OKRs. And so what they did in that particular role, very similar, was the company built out their OKRs, then I built out mine, and then I disseminated that down to my team. But what I did in the 3 C's was my team still had some trouble prioritizing. So what I said was, let's look at those 3 C's and let's, for example, take the renewal process. you've got milestones that are tied to what the customer is trying to achieve with regards to the renewal. Okay. So from that perspective, the first thing I want my team to do for a prioritization is, what are your renewals that are in flight? Okay. That are quick wins that you can resolve, whether it's an auto renewal or it's got a renewal coming up in say 60 days or less. That's going to help you prioritize because that's a milestone. But then going back to what both Felicia and Melissa said, it's going to be tied back to what milestones within that renewal are tied back to the customer's overall growth. So I have them use that sort of starting with the milestone. What are those milestones that are in flight that are, to your point, Melissa, quick wins? And then making sure that they have the bandwidth, to your point, Felicia, if they cannot, for example, if they don't have a renewals team, because obviously if they're full stack, that doesn't exist, who else can they collaborate with to help them to, for nothing else, to make sure that they're successful, but to also preserve that personal well-being. So use milestones to prioritize, tie them back to the KPIs or the OKRs, and then collaborate where you can. So that would be what I would say is a way to prioritize when you're dealing in a full stack environment.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, that was all really good. Follow-up question, Felicia, you brought it up. Just as far as like, what are some tools or frameworks? You brought up the RACI charts. Can you just give us a 1-minute download on what those are and like how does someone structure it if you can?
Yeah, so for RACI, it's who's responsible, who's accountable, who's being consulted, and who's being informed. And there's a lot of, overlap in customer facing roles, right? Everybody's customer adjacent. I like to say everybody's customer success to set that expectation, right? Because you'll hear a lot like, well, you're responsible for the customer, you're responsible for the client. Well, everybody's responsible for the customer. And everybody wants to help out and pitch in. And so if you at least have a framework, then there's not a lot of confusion and back and forth. It's more cohesive on how you're going to solve a challenge that comes up, like an escalation or, something last minute. I talk about like the SOC 2 report and they need this contract information and they didn't tell you and it's due tomorrow. But you also have your performance reviews for your team due tomorrow, and you're in a customer meeting, and how is that going to happen? And then you collaborate and you say, okay, well, we're going to do this time, but how can we prevent that in the future? Or who can we train and empower, to do this? So you might have to take a step back. It may take a little longer, but don't fall into, I could just do it myself faster, because you'll never catch up. And that's one of the frameworks. And then the other is an Eisenhower, looking at what's urgent, important, not urgent. There's, 4 buckets. And you can, in advance, lay that out and put in the different types of things like renewals, escalations, put them in a bucket so you could think about it, have that proactively if you're a new CSM. Already kind of had that laid out for you and help your decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And we use Dachi at my last startup, which is the same as RACI. It's just the R is replaced with the D for decision maker. So, but I have to use that to build out all my engagement models for my teams.
Cool. Anything you use, Melissa?
I was going to say there's acronyms for everything. And like it's different at every company. We had it with like a W when I worked at a different company because the company started with a W. I think the only other thing I would add, and it's less like a framework, but more just like thinking about your data, about what's going on with your customers. So whether you have a health score, whether you have indicators about kind of what's going on when you're thinking about your decision making, if there is any confusion or you're not sure where to put somebody, I think sometimes when you kind of really understand what's going on with your customer and have that data about like their health, for example, you can kind of use that to guide you within an existing framework, right? So I think that's just the other thing that I would add to that.
Love that.
Yeah, I'm like super old school, and so Brian Tracy, who's like one of those self-help people who wrote a bunch of books and all that stuff, he had a method where it's just like ABC, and I write like my A1 task for the day. And I really liked his insight where he just said, you can tell how important something is, a task is, based off of the consequences of the task. So if I didn't do my A1 task, there would be direct, maybe even severe consequences if I didn't get it done, right? And so that's kind of how I've messaged out to the teams that I've managed and people that I've worked with is, like communicating with my boss. Hey, can you do this? I said, I'm working on my A1 task right now. And unless you tell me it's above my A1 task, then I'm going to do this. And then they don't, usually. They're like, no, you can do it. Just make it your A2. That was usually the response is like, hey, this is the A2 task. Just finish what you're doing. Which, so this just brought up a question that came to my mind, and this doesn't have to be super long-winded, but how does the panel feel about multitasking? Because I'm not a believer, but I don't believe in multitasking. But if you do, can you defend the position or the virtues of it? What are your thoughts? Or just say, hey, you need to be good at multitasking. What are the thoughts there? Melissa, Deidre, and then Felicia.
Oh, it's such a hot topic. I think my opinion on this changes sometimes, honestly, because I think sometimes you can multitask in certain situations. You shouldn't be multitasking on a customer call. You probably shouldn't be multitasking in your one-on-one with your manager, but sometimes there can be moments for it. However, I think what I'm more for is like, you have to be able to switch sometimes, and it's less multitasking, but your ability to switch from one task to another, because sometimes that is required of you because we move so fast, because there's so much to do. I think that's the thing I would hone in on more than the multitasking, because I think sometimes you can't do everything. You try and do everything all at once, you're really getting nothing done well. And so I guess my hot take would be maybe I also don't believe in multitasking, but I do believe in the ability to switch quickly, and not constantly, but quickly when you need to, because I think that adaptability is really important.
Put your hand up. Give me a virtual high five. There we go. Welcome to the team.
I'm with you. That is a hot take, though. Hasn't always been my take. I will say that.
Yeah.
Plus one on everything Melissa just said. We're definitely aligned. I will say this. There's statistical data that says there's no such thing as fully multitasking. Okay, so that I'll throw that out there. People can look at that. But I do believe it's contextual. Exactly what she's saying. In the right moment, you can do that, and you need to have the ability to pivot so that you can do it successfully. So it's contextual. Exactly. Is it appropriate in all circumstances? No, but the ability to do that is a critical ability, particularly for those of us in this role, because we do have dueling priorities, which is why we're having this call. So I would say I don't think it can be done, but I think that sometimes you need to do it whether you want to or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to give the high five. I don't think it's physically possible.
High fives.
Some people say you're driving and doing some other, thing, following a map, but you do have to pivot. You have to have the temperament to be able to pivot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Some people pivot, but it's very uncomfortable for them.
Yes,
it's part of the role, and your brain has to switch and contain multitudes of different scenarios going on with different customers at the same time. But you can't truly give any two things attention, at once, thinking about it if you're trying to solve a problem.
The only evidence I have that I've been able to multitask effectively is when my wife is no.
I don't think you put that on a recorded line, Brad.
Yeah.
Walk away from that one. Just walk away.
No. But it is when I'm reading to my kids, I'm reading these real simple books, and I'm thinking about, my brain is just saying the words, talking about the cat is lonely and finds a bowl of milk and all this stuff. But then my brain is thinking about Success Panda. I'm like, oh.
Are you sure you said the right words of that book? Or you
Yeah, I mean,
maybe you thought you did. Let's play it back.
But yeah, I think that's an important thing, though, is just trying to be present. Going back to the application here, the CS role, right? Being on some of these calls, right? What's the max amount of people you've seen on a call that didn't actually contribute at all to the call? So the max I've seen is 12. Okay. I've seen 12 people where it's really a one-on-one conversation with two people instead of, and this is a transition to our next question. Okay. So instead of going full, Elon Musk is controversial right now, but what he does do right now is like he'll just tell people, if you start explaining a task to him, he'll just be like, walk away. I mean, that's socially unacceptable, but he's basically just saying, hey, if I don't need to be at this meeting, we're not going to have a meeting.
Yeah.
So I think there could be a lot more of that, because when CS folk talk to me and they're like, hey, I'm overwhelmed, I'm like, well, what meetings could you just
Step away from.
just step away from? Why can't you talk about that with your manager, right? If you're not playing an active role, or even if you have a spot and then you leave early. What are your thoughts about all that? So the question is how do we help the people who are currently in the IC, or even, manager roles, whatever, people management, if they feel overwhelmed, which a lot of people do, how do they realistically start prioritizing, and can they step away, and how do you have that difficult conversation with your manager? Like if Melissa is my manager or Deidre is my manager, and I say, hey, I'm working 10 hours a day, I don't have the work-life balance I want, here's some things I need to step out. How do you have those conversations? So that's a lot of different things, but take it however you want. Deidre, we'll start with you, and then we'll go Melissa, Felicia.
Yeah, no, I've had this question with my direct reports. It's particularly coming back to meetings. Brad, I love that you brought that up. You teed that up perfectly. My biggest challenge is getting my team sometimes to build out agendas, because the agenda is going to drive the prioritization. So first and foremost, when you say 12 people are there, but only 2 of them are talking, then those other 10 people don't need to be in the meeting. So unless they have a role in the agenda, they don't necessarily need to be there. So for my direct reports, if they're asking me, do I need to go to this meeting? Then I first ask them, are you on the agenda? And if they're not on the agenda, then do they have a supporting role in that cast, for lack of a better term? Or can they just, have it recorded and follow up later? So that's a form of helping them prioritize with regards to meetings. And I use that for other options as well. If I'm asking them to do a particular task, and to your point, it doesn't fit into the A1, I just want them to have that conversation with me as their leader to say, right now I'm focusing on A1. I don't necessarily need to be in this meeting. I'm going to go focus on those other things. And as long as nothing else falls apart while they're doing that, then I think that's a way of prioritizing. So is it on your A1, to your point? Am I a part of the agenda, to that second point? Otherwise, everything else is not a priority for that individual. That's how I kind of help them prioritize. And I hope it works for them. I think it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that so much. I think, and I will say too, like this is a skill that's going to help you, whether you're an IC now or manager later, director, VP, C-suite, whatever, because like someone's always going to be trying to demand your time, and you're the one who's responsible for saying no. I think when I think about, people having those hard conversations, like your manager's not going to be upset with you that you're trying to prioritize your time. They're probably actually going to be impressed. So like, I would say if you do have to have that conversation, like go into it confidently and say, hey, I thought about this. Here's what I know. Like, I'm just letting you know that I'm not going to be here. Here's why. If you feel differently, let me know. And I think that that's a good way to approach it and come at it from a position of confidence that you're trying to, be in control of your schedule. I think like when you let other people lead your world and your calendar, then you're not focusing on probably the things that you need to focus on, because you're letting everybody else define that for you. And so I think great tips, Deidre, on how to do that, with your manager in a good and productive way. I think the agenda is such a great point. And like, if there's no meeting agenda at all, you don't need to go to that meeting.
I stopped going a long time ago.
Exactly. So I think that's such a good like anchor to the agenda. But Felicia, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with both of you. Definitely making sure you can support your position with that conversation with your manager is really helpful. So if you just go in with that frazzled, it's too much, I can't do it, like make sure you're telling them what else you're doing instead and the why. And certainly agree, if somebody's inviting you to a meeting, say again, what is my role? What is your expectation of me? And typically in customer success, you're gonna get that answer over and over, that we have to be resilient and pushing back on. Well, you own the client, like you're responsible for the client. And like, yes, I understand my role is, but, and you're able to, speak to that person and see like, why do you need me here? And if there's an alternative option or an alternative person that could sit in to do that. And you certainly want to shorten meetings, give yourself time at the end of meetings to summarize or perform tasks or follow up that you need to, instead of stacking those meetings, jumping on one after the other. That is a sure way to the burnout lane.
Yeah. All right, I'm ready for my rant, and I think now's a good time to deploy it. Hold on, I need to do my breathing exercise before I do. Okay, done. So let's see, where do we start? If I were going into, let's say that I'm a director or a VP going into a role, and then you're getting to know the team, and you get the feedback of like, hey, people are burnt out. There's a lot, we have a lot of competing prioritizing tasks, all the things. I would sit down with a one-on-one with them and have them write out in a single day, just write out one day, all the tasks that you do, right? And then I would say put a star by the ones that are results and put a one by activity. And the big thing when you're in an IC role and then when you go to a people manager roles, do not look at activity or activities the same as results. Okay. So anybody can just busy themselves doing anything. You can look around and be like, oh, this needs tidied. I need to rename all of the files in SharePoint to be under so that they're all that's me. I mean, my file stuff is nice. But yeah, no, I mean, don't mistake activities for results. And I think that is such a big thing. And I think the big thing what that comes from gets back to one of my favorite topics of just who's your manager. Do you have a manager that's a micromanager who's trying to manage your activity, or are you in a company that values that and that is a results oriented organization, right? And I think that's a really big topic, but I've been in both, and I can almost inherently, when I talk to IC people who come to me, you can always tell based off of like the profile of what they're describing, whether or not they have someone who's micromanaging them or someone who is results based. And shocking, I'm not a micromanager. I'm incredibly results based oriented, right? And so let's talk about that. So thoughts about that? Do you see that too, or any follow-along thoughts with that? When does that play at all, or is it just like you want to rage quit the call because it offended your sensibility?
I'll say you definitely have to, going back to, pouring too much in the same glass. So either there's more people or you have to pour less in. And so a lot that I do is around like you said, sitting down, tell me everything you do, and I'm going to cut the fat out wherever I can for you. So let's look at that first and see where we can trim these activities that aren't gaining value.
Yeah.
And then let's see what's left from there. And I always like to empower people. So I'm definitely not a micromanager. People need to, the way that they grow is by learning. The way you learn is by failing. So
everybody who comes on the show says they're not a micromanager, but I know you're out there because I'm talking to people, and I need to find you people and have you on the show and come defend your position. Because I
will say that there is some degree of micromanagement in everyone.
Yeah.
In certain, you're overlooking a certain task at some point in some part of a process or a project. You've done it, right? That might not be your model, but you've done it.
Yeah, fair enough. Either one of you can jump in if you want. Can rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, go ahead, go. I can add quickly. I mean, I agree. I think even the exercise you described, like so many people don't even know what they're doing. So I think like just the practice of that, like, which sounds silly, but like sometimes you're so busy, you're like, what did I do today? What was I working on? So I think like that is a great exercise and I'm here for it. I agree, Felicia. I do think everyone has a little bit in them, and there are moments where you catch yourself, right? So like, Brad, people are out there, like, I'm sure I've done it. I'm sure everyone on this call has done it. I think like the mindfulness of trying not to do it and empowering your people is like what everyone would like to do and tries to do, but like people have their moments, right? I do think though, that exercise is really important, because if you're doing all these things and you have nothing to show for it, like that's only going to affect you and the company poorly at the end of the day. And I think sometimes it feels good to be busy in the world we live in. Like people associate that with productivity because it feels like you did something. But if you really have to speak to it, that's where the results come in that you were talking about, Brad, then you have nothing to say. You probably shouldn't be doing that task. So
100%. What I'll say is just a brief real life scenario. In my previous role as SVP of customer success, I had a VP reporting to me, and I was constantly being told that they didn't have time to do a lot of the things that I felt were tangible to their job, particularly with relates to the 3 Cs. And so I asked them to go through a task management exercise. And I realized at that level, that's probably not what they thought they should have to do. But in reality, when I got that document and I looked at it, almost 90% of the things they were doing first weren't tied to the 3 Cs. So they weren't what I would consider value realization from my customers, retention. They weren't driving growth or revenue for the company. And more importantly, they weren't doing advocacy or loyalty for the customers. So immediately those things, I said, we're going to move those tasks to someone else. Now this other 10%, these are things I want to focus on. And now you have more time to do the things that really are related to the 3 Cs. That was an impactful conversation, both for myself as well as for that individual, because they weren't getting the results I needed them to get. But once we reframed what they needed to do in order to get those results, I had them, I should put it this way. They weren't coming to me anymore telling me they didn't have time to do the things that they needed to do. So that's how I look at it from a task prioritization standpoint.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that that if you have a manager who is very results oriented, and then you start to notice they start micromanaging you, like that's probably because you need it, right? Because going back to what Deidre just said, if you're not producing the results, that's why you're on the payroll. Like that's one of my favorite interview questions too. Like, why is this position on the payroll? Because they'll inherently tell you the number one reason from their perspective, right? Why they are. But yeah, if you're not performing, then that's when like people get on PIPs, which is effectively being officially micromanaged, right?
Yep, done those.
So okay, so if we take this position, one of the challenges, and if this is you, just know that you're still loved, but there's always people that can reach out to one of these three and ask for help. So in customer success, because it's still quote unquote relatively new, especially compared to the other functions of business, right? Yeah. We still have people who get hired into, we'll say, senior roles, director, VP, higher roles, who don't know what the hell they're doing. So if you're in that position, then you might have to micromanage as a way to kind of justify your existence, right? So what I'm saying is, if you are being like, it's never sometimes as clear as my manager is micromanaging me, but I'm doing a good job. Well, that means you're competent, you're getting the result. Maybe that person doesn't know how to add any more value to the organization than besides just micromanaging people, because they think that's what leadership is. So let's open up that can real quick. What are thoughts on that? So Melissa, it looks like you're ready, and Deidre, and then.
I'm just thinking, I actually think it's such a good point, because I think a lot of people get either promoted into role or whatever, or don't have the right like coaching or mentors in their life or anything. And I think, I don't know if you want advice for these people or kind of where you want this to go, but I think like
but do you agree though that like, okay, it's the Peter principle. You've been promoted, or you've been moved to a position of basically incompetence, where if it's your first time director, first time VP, first time executive, you're not super polished. You're probably, but I think the big thing is like, what kind of help? Like, should they reach out for help, or
Oh yeah,
how would,
yeah. I think
how would you handle that situation if that was you?
I would reach out for help. I mean, I think if you were not like, and this goes back to what you were saying, Felicia, about like filling your own cup first, right? Like you need to be working on yourself constantly, both like personally and professionally. But if like you're in a new director role or you've been a director for a while and you feel like you don't know what you should be doing and you don't want to admit that, like that's not the way to go. Don't push that under the carpet. Like you should find a coach, find a mentor. Like I think Deidre even
take those courses.
Exactly. Like I asked her for advice. Someone referred me to her recently and we had a conversation and that was great. Like, don't be afraid to do those things. That's what you should be doing, because if you are trying to create value in some other way, and this could manifest in so many different things, like it can be not hitting your goals or not being able to coach the people on your team correctly or anything like that. Like, I think that's self-work, your point, courses, coming to things like this, Brad, like this is stuff that helps people. Right. And so I think you just need to be constantly filling your own cup and learning. That would be my advice. And don't be afraid to say you don't know something, because that's okay.
Yeah.
Everyone does.
100%.
Well, first, I will say it was such a joy to talk to Melissa, because she didn't need any coaching. She is an exceptional professional at what she does. I just enjoy talking to her. So I'm glad I provided some semblance of insight. There's three things that I say to the people that I coach, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm a mentor for women of customer success. And I will say, and this is really sad to say, a lot of my mentees are coming to me with micromanagers for bosses. And they are individuals who've been elevated into those roles that really do not have the expertise to do what they do. So there's three things I say to them. The first thing I say is know your metrics. If your boss doesn't give them to you, figure them out on your own, but make sure that you can use them to define your success. Yeah. The second thing is I believe in the Kaizen principle. Never stop learning, continuing education. I am in 4 book clubs. I am in CS leaders groups. I am trying to make sure that at least once a day I learn something new, regardless of what my role is or what my level is. And then the third thing to all of you is you've all said it, and I love the fact that you're continuing to say it. We really have to prioritize ourselves. And when we do that, one of the things that I have, if you guys are paying attention to anything I'm doing on LinkedIn right now, I have my Fab 5.
Yes.
Fab number 5 is customer or employee experience. And I put that as an OKR in my previous role, and I've done it in my last few roles, because I think what we do is one of the best jobs in the world, but it also is one of the most difficult. So know your metrics, continue to learn, and then prioritize yourself, because when you do that, I love, Felicia, you keep talking about self-care, then we're going to be better people at our jobs. We're going to be better people for our customers, and we're going to be better people for our company. So full stop. I know I said a lot, but just kind of wanted to throw all that out there.
That's good.
Fantastic. Not much to add to that. You can continue stretching yourself in different areas. Like even if I managed at Avon, but it's a different environment. Those are accountants. There's not much daily challenges for them, right? Everything's kind of the same. You're still managing people, so everybody has their different temperaments and the way they like to be managed. So you have to be mindful of that, and you have to motivate people. But then you go into customer success, and it's completely different. So you have all the different personalities, but now you have all these different challenges that they have to navigate every day. And how do they go through that? And one of the biggest things I learned was a leadership course on just sitting down with folks and really understanding, is the role right for them? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not right for them, and you work with them and help them improve and help them recognize it. But it's really learning. If you're a new manager, you really have to understand people, what motivates people, and know each individual person on your team, and not just the tasks that they're doing. We're not robots. People aren't robots, right? So again, take those courses, ask for those mentors, be vulnerable. That's key.
Yeah, no, this has all been really good. And I think that I'm glad we kind of covered it from both top down and bottom up, right? Because if you are getting micromanaged or you feel overwhelmed, just know that you're in good company. A lot of people are. The CS space, people are doing the work of what used to be 2 people's jobs. I was meeting with someone who wanted to do some coaching with me yesterday, and she was telling me that she was in her role and she was just getting more and more at it, just like reorganized the portfolio, went from managing X amount to getting like a couple 100,000 more customers, more strategic accounts, and she's burnt out, just burnt out. And then when she left her role, they were like, why? Like, what can we do to make it work? And it's kind of like, that ship has sailed, right? If you're not willing to listen to me and hear the feedback, like you're going to, because we'll just say like top talent people that are, like we said, are providing receipts, right? I once had a LinkedIn post where I was like, hey, show me you care about your career. Post me the last receipt of something you spent money on or you engaged in for free. Like in the comments, it was like crickets, There were some people, but the point is like, if you want to continually improve and you want to continually learn, you have to provide the receipts. That doesn't literally mean spend money sometimes, but it can be going to free events, being involved in communities, helping mentor somebody. But the people that do that, that's not everybody. And that's what I found like in the space is like the people who are taking their work seriously, and trying to get better, like those people are gifts to every organization, right? And those are the people that we want to find. And the fact is it's a loss when if you're adding things to some of your best people and they're trying to say, hey, I'm getting overwhelmed, and then you're not hearing that feedback and then they leave. I mean, you got to look in the mirror at that point and really ask questions like, hey, are we not prioritizing properly in our organization, or how's this coming down? So let's do a quick fire round of 60 seconds each of when it comes to prioritizing task. If you had to put it in, let's just say one sentence. If you had one sentence that you could pass on to someone trying to transition into customer success, and they'd say, hey, Deidre, what's the one sentence? How am I gonna thrive in prioritizing tasks as a CSM? What would you say?
Well, you're going to thrive when you focus on the customer, and more importantly, you also focus on the revenue. Those two things will be game changers, and they'll set you up for success.
There you go. Melissa and Felicia, anything to add?
Plus one to that, I'm big on the revenue. And so I totally agree. I think when you're thinking about good prioritization, are you making an impact on the customer so that they feel valued? And are you doing that in service of the goals of the rest of the business or the business as a whole?
Nice.
And I'm going to go with the perspective of mindset and just bring it back to prioritize yourself. And that's not a selfish thing. Just prioritize your goals first over, somebody else's goals in an adjacent department. Don't get caught up in the flywheel of those daily tasks, and so that you could avoid that feeling of burnout.
There you go. Lots of commas in yours, Felicia. In your one sentence, comma. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it was. I think it's been a great episode. I know I've learned something. I think our audience will too. So we'll sign off here in a second, but before we do, where can people? What are you doing? Anything you want to pitch? Where can people contact you and connect with you? Felicia, then Melissa, then Deidre.
Yeah, so I'm part of the CX Exchange, fully volunteer-run customer success professional group. I'm on the board there, and I help manage the volunteers. So if you're looking to get involved, that's a great community, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
The community. I love that community. You can find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out if anyone needs anything. I'm big on paying it forward. So anybody who needs help, slide into my messages. I'm cool with that. I think the other thing I would note is, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm part of the New York chapter of Women of CS. I know, Deidre, I think you're on the Dallas side of that as well. And so anyone local to New York or just in general, part of that community, if you're interested in it, I think it's such an important space and it helps all of us in the CS community. So please reach out anytime.
Thank you. I will say thank you, Brad, for allowing me to do the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Felicia and Melissa. You were wonderful co-panel, so I couldn't have enjoyed speaking with anybody more. As far as reaching with me, I'm part of the CX community as well. However, I also am a mentor for women in customer success. But what I really want you guys to tune in is I'm doing two things. I've got my Fab 5 for 2025. I posted on it a few weeks ago, and it blew up with Success Hacker, making it number one in the top 5 for that week. But I'm also doing a series on Star Trek and customer success. So any fellow Trekkies out there, I just finished the first original series. I'm getting ready to move into the next series. So if you want me to continue with the series, give me a shout out on LinkedIn. And if you don't, too bad. I'm going to do it anyway. But thank you so much.
It's fabulous. Keep
Thank you,
doing
Brad.
it. I love it.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Deidre.
Brad.
All right. Everyone have a great weekend.
Have a
Bye.
great
Bye,
weekend.
ladies.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.